Hey, what's up, everyone? Today I just wanted to go ahead and do a deck tech for Jeskai Geist in Modern. Um, this has been my favorite deck for years, and I'm excited to start recording and sharing some matches with you guys. We'll go ahead and jump right in. For our threats, I've got four Snapcaster Mages to pair with all of our cheap removal and counter spells and cantrips in the deck. I've got four copies of Spell Queller, which allows us to counter a spell whilst also starting a clock on the opponent. It can also counter some spells that our traditional counter magic couldn't typically counter. I've got three copies of Geist of St. Traft. At four copies, I feel like I flood out on them sometimes, and at less than three copies, I don't see them often enough, so three is definitely the sweet spot for Geist. I've got two copies of Rattle Chains, which is a bit of a pet card, but it actually helps the deck do a few things. It gives us an extra early attacker, which is pretty important and big for Jeskai decks. That's not something we've traditionally been able to have. It also can protect a spell queller by giving it hexproof if the spell queller is exiled a spell that you don't want your opponent to get back. And lastly, it can also give our Geist of St. Traft Flash, which kind of helps shore up the biggest downside of Geist, which is having to tap out during your turn to play him. Moving on to the removal suite, I've got four Path Exiles. I still play Path over on Thin Ice because I don't like the mana base restrictions that on Thin Ice puts on your deck. And also once Counterspell is released, these Mana Leak and Path to Exile non-bows will be all shored up. Although it still sucks ramping the opponent, I think it's still the best one mana white removal exile spell in Modern. I've got four bolts and two helixes to double as small creature removal and to help us go to the face and turn the corner and get aggressive. These six bolt effects paired with Snapcaster Mages and the power of Geist of St. Traft, as well as having extra flying attackers with Spell Queller and Rattle Chains, gives us some really aggressive avenues that the deck hasn't always had access to. Uh, for our counterspell suite, I play two Mana Leaks, two Logic Knots, one Spell Snare for the early game counters, and then two Archmage's Charms and two Cryptic Commands for our more modal multi-purpose counter spells and card advantage. Uh, for our cantrips, I have six cantrips in the deck. Currently, I'm at four peak and two opt. Historically, I've always run Serum Visions, but I really like taking the deck in a all flash slash instant speed direction. The peaks also allow us to check and see if the coast is clear to play Geist. Can also let us see if Spell Queller is going to be able to successfully take care of a spell, or if the opponent has removal and we need to use a hard counter for the spell. For the mana base, we have 22 lands. Our mana curve tops out at two Cryptic Commands, so we can get away with being kind of low on lands. The 22 lands are comprised of 9 fetch lands and 5 shock lands to help make sure we enable our colors. Also got one of each of the buddy lands, so that would be Glacial Fortress and Sulphur Falls. I've got one Mystic Gate to help facilitate the double and triple blue spells as well as the double white spells out of our sideboard. Run one Fiery Islet and one Castle Vantress as kind of utility lands. These two spots could definitely fluctuate and become whatever you wanted them to be. I've got two basic islands, one basic plains. I used to run a basic mountain, but I find that it screws your mana base more often than you want to actually fetch it out of your deck, so I've removed it. That is the entire main deck. Moving on to our sideboard, I've got two Relic of Progenitus. These are obviously for graveyard-based strategies. Dredge, Luris, opposing control decks, etc. Unfortunately, they are sometimes too slow against Dredge. It's just a downside of it, and maybe they should be something else. Then I've got two Blessed Alliance. These are absolutely great against burn and any kind of aggressive deck. They can also help deal with tough to deal with the creatures by making the opponent edict them or sacrifice them when they go to attack you. They're really great against Death Shadow and Prowess, etc. Settle the Wreckage applies to a lot of the same decks, kind of a gotcha spell that nobody seems to play around. It can deal with wide boards and tall boards alike. I've got two Disdainful Strokes. These, again, cover a vast majority of the meta. Super, super functional spell in matchups against Amulet Titan, Through the Breach, control matchups, Tron and Eldrazi Tron. They can counter Scape Shifts, they can counter Bring to Lights, they can counter Collected Companies. I mean, the list goes on and on. Disdainful Stroke, definitely worth having in your sideboard right now. We've got two Cleansing Fire to help shore up the Tron matchup, which is a notoriously uphill battle for Jeskai Geist, kind of always has been. Two Deflecting Palm, just for the massive amount of spaghetti monsters I've seen flying around in Modern lately. It's also good against Burn, Prowess, Death Shadow decks, a few other random decks. Again, just a really good card to have. Another gotcha card. I like my gotcha sideboard cards. Um, I've got two Forsake the Worldly. Modern staple, Forsake the Worldly. Yes. Um, if you couldn't already guess, these are kind of to help out with the Heliod matchup. Heliod has Indestructible, so he kind of gets around most of the traditional Wear Tear style effects that I would normally have here in my sideboard. These can exile. It does cost 3 mana, but it also has cycling, so if you bring these in to hedge against Blood Moons, Chalices, or any other artifacts, enchantments, and the opponents do not play these cards, you can cycle it out for value, kind of redeeming for its overcost. And then I've also got one copy of Engineered Explosives just to help fill in any gaps, and it's just great against anything playing a lot of small creatures. Prowess with all their 1-drops, any token strategies. I would probably bring it in against Heliod Company just because they have a lot of 2 and 3 drops, etc., etc. Very, very functional card in a lot of matchups. That is the current deck. With Modern Horizons 2 coming out, I don't see a whole lot of changes that I want to make. Uh, Definitely the clear-cut choice is to swap these 2 Mana Leaks and these 2 Logic Knots out for a set of counter spells. Aside from that, there's some random Tron Hate and Planeswalker Hate cards that might be viable for sideboard options. But those are really the only cards that I'm really looking forwards to in Modern Horizons 2. So there shouldn't be any big changes. If I do make any changes, I'll let you guys know before I do any leagues with it. Other than that, I think we're going to wrap this up and start recording some games with it. Thank you guys for watching.